My name is Evelyn Moore. I am 63 years old. For most of my life, I was a homemaker, the quiet foundation that held my family together. I cooked, I mended, I kept traditions alive. When my husband Thomas was still here, he used to say that I was the center of our home, the quiet heart that kept it beating. After he passed away, the walls grew silent, and I stayed in this house alone, carrying memories heavier than stone. But nothing prepared me for the silence that came the day I opened my safe. I still remember the sound of the combination dial, 3 turns to the right, 2 to the left, 1 more to the right. My hands knew the pattern better than my mind. That safe had been mine for 30 years, a quiet place where I stored the small treasures of a life well lived. The emerald earrings Thomas gave me when I turned 25, my mother's pearl necklace worn on my wedding day, the gold bracelet I received when Daniel, my youngest son, was born. Click, the metal door swung open. Empty. The shelves that once held pieces of my history were bare, a hollow space mocking me with its stillness. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My heart pounded in my ears as if trying to fill the void in front of me. I reached inside, touching nothing but cold steel, and I felt as though I had been erased. Behind me, a voice spoke, smooth and almost amused. "Oh, mother-in-law, we donated everything. You don't need that stuff anymore." It was Valerie, my daughter-in-law. She leaned against the doorframe, her arms folded, her smile sharp as glass. Her words stung deeper than if she had slapped me. Donated. As if my life, my memories, my marriage could be placed in a cardboard box and carried away like clutter. She looked at me the way one looks at something old and useless, ready to be discarded. My knees shook. I held on to the frame of the safe, feeling the strength drain from my body. But then I remembered something Thomas used to say whenever we faced hardship. "Evelyn, silence can be power. You don't have to shout to be heard. You just have to choose the right moment." So I steadied my breath. I turned slowly to face her. My hands trembled, but my voice was calm. "You're right, Valerie. I don't need those jewels anymore." Her smile widened, triumph flashing across her face. She thought she had won. She thought I had surrendered. I took 1 step toward her. "But you," I said quietly, "you are going to need a lawyer." The color drained from her cheeks. The mask slipped. For the first time, she had no words. That moment, her silence was mine. And in that silence, I knew the war had begun. On the small table in my bedroom sat an old ceramic teacup, the last thing Thomas had given me before his heart gave out on an ordinary morning. My hand brushed against it as I passed, the glaze smooth beneath my fingers, a reminder of who I was. That cup became my anchor, proof that though my treasures were gone, my strength was still here. I closed the safe and walked out of the room, leaving Valerie pale and speechless behind me. She believed she had stripped me bare. She was wrong. Because my story does not begin with an empty safe. It begins on the day I buried Thomas. The morning of Thomas's funeral felt heavier than any weight I had ever carried. 42 years of marriage, and it ended not with a grand farewell, but with a sudden silence. He had gone on an ordinary Tuesday morning while sipping his coffee and reading the paper. One moment he was speaking about our next trip to Florida. The next his chest tightened, his breath caught, and he was gone. No warning, no goodbye. The church was filled with lilies, their fragrance thick and almost suffocating. I wore the black dress he always loved, the one he said made me look elegant. I kept my hands clasped tight in my lap, gripping the silk handkerchief that had belonged to my mother. People whispered condolences, touched my arm, and offered soft words, but their voices blurred together into a dull hum. I remember watching the coffin being lowered into the earth. The thud of dirt against the wood echoed inside me. I wanted to scream, to throw myself down beside him, but I stayed silent. My children stood around me, Daniel at my side, trying to be strong. My daughters cried openly. My older son clenched his jaw. But I, Evelyn Moore, sat still as stone, because I knew if I allowed one sound to escape, I would shatter completely. After the burial, the house became a museum of absence. His coffee cup still sat by the sink. His chair by the window waited each evening, empty. The scent of his cologne lingered on the pillows I refused to wash. Every room whispered his name, and yet the silence swallowed me whole. I cooked meals for one, folded laundry that never piled up, made tea in the ceramic cup he had once bought me at a flea market. That cup became my companion, something solid in the sea of loss. I forgot how to think about myself. For decades, I had lived as a wife and mother. I knew how to pack lunches, pay bills, remember birthdays, tend to a garden, soothe a crying child. But I had never learned how to be simply Evelyn. Without Thomas, I was lost in a maze of chores that no longer mattered. I existed, but I did not live. It was Daniel, my youngest, who called the most. He checked in every other day. He came by on Sundays, sometimes bringing pastries from the bakery we used to love. He was always my sensitive one, the boy who cried when his pet hamster died, the young man who hugged me tight when he left for college. His presence softened the sharp edges of my grief. One afternoon, about 6 months after the funeral, Daniel came to the house with someone new. "Mom," he said with a tentative smile, "I'd like you to meet Valerie." She stepped forward, carrying a bouquet of sunflowers so bright they seemed out of place in my dim living room. Her hair was long and dark, her smile perfect, her eyes seemingly sincere. "Mrs. Moore," she said, her voice warm, "it's an honor to meet you. Daniel has told me so much about you. I'm so sorry for your loss." Her words melted something in me. It had been so long since anyone had spoken with such gentleness in my home. I felt a flicker of hope, as though maybe this young woman might bring life back into my quiet world. In the following weeks, Valerie became a regular presence. She helped me in the kitchen, chopping vegetables and asking about Thomas's favorite recipes. She walked with me to the market, holding the bags even when I insisted I could manage. She laughed at my stories, leaned in close, touched my arm as though she truly cared. I wanted to believe her kindness, and yet there were moments, subtle, fleeting, when her smile did not reach her eyes. I would catch her gaze slipping past me, studying the house, the furniture, the photos on the wall. There was a sharpness there, a calculation too quick for most to notice. But grief had sharpened my senses, and though I wanted companionship, I could not ignore the chill in my stomach. Still, when Daniel announced their engagement, I cried tears of happiness. I told myself Thomas would have wanted me to celebrate, to embrace this new chapter. The wedding was small but beautiful. I even helped pay for part of the reception. Watching Daniel smile, I convinced myself that Valerie's presence was a blessing. One Sunday, not long after the wedding, Valerie sat across from me at the kitchen table. She had made coffee, placed it in front of me in Thomas's cup without asking. "Mother-in-law," she began softly, "you must get lonely in this big house." I nodded, unsure of what she was leading to. "We're renting a tiny apartment and it's expensive. What would you think if Daniel and I moved in here for a while? That way we can keep you company." My heart leaped. For months I had woken up to silence, to rooms echoing with memories. The thought of voices again, footsteps on the stairs, someone to share meals with. It filled me with relief. Daniel added quickly, "It would only be temporary, Mom, just until we save up for our own place." I looked at my son's hopeful face, at Valerie's gentle smile. Loneliness had gnawed at me for too long, and the idea of family under one roof again seemed like a gift. "Yes," I said, without hesitation. "Of course. Move in. I'd love the company." Valerie's smile brightened, but for the briefest second, so quick I almost doubted my eyes, I saw something else flicker across her face. It was not a relief or joy. It was something sharper, something like triumph. I pushed the thought aside. I told myself I was imagining it, that grief was making me suspicious. That night, I laid out fresh sheets in the guest room, humming softly for the first time since Thomas had died. I told myself this was the beginning of healing, the return of family, life. But I could not have known then that in opening my door, I was also opening the way to my own undoing. At first, having Daniel and Valerie in the house felt like a gift. Their laughter filled the kitchen where silence once pressed down like a heavy blanket. Valerie cooked dinners with spices I had never used, and Daniel grilled on Sundays like his father once did. For a short time, I convinced myself that life was warming again, that perhaps I had been too quick to assume solitude was my only fate. But the changes began quietly, the way a leak begins before it floods a room. One morning, I came downstairs to find the blue porcelain vase missing from the mantel. It was a vase Thomas had brought back from Santa Fe, a piece of turquoise glaze that shimmered when the afternoon sun hit it just right. "Valerie," I asked, "have you seen the vase that was here?" She turned from the sink, wiping her hands on a towel. "Oh, that old thing? It was chipped at the bottom. I put it in a box for donation. We don't need clutter in the living room, do we?" Her tone was sweet, almost casual, but my heart sank. That vase wasn't clutter. It was a memory of a trip where Thomas and I had laughed until our stomachs hurt. I opened my mouth to protest, then closed it again. I told myself, it's just an object, just a vase. But in the quiet of my room later, I whispered the truth to myself. I am losing pieces of my life one by one, and no one sees it but me. The next week, the family photographs disappeared from the hallway. The smiling faces of my children at different ages, the picture of Thomas holding newborn Daniel, the black and white portrait of my parents, gone. In their place hung a sleek, abstract print Valerie had purchased. "Modern touch," she explained cheerfully, "makes the hallway look brighter." I nodded, though my chest ached. That hallway had once been a timeline of love. Now it was an empty corridor with a painting that meant nothing. Then came the curtains. The lace drapes Thomas had chosen for the dining room windows vanished, replaced by heavy gray panels. The room darkened, the soft sunlight muted. When I asked about them, Valerie laughed lightly. "Lace is old-fashioned. This is more stylish. Don't you think so?" I swallowed my words. I told myself I was overreacting. After all, curtains were only fabric, photographs could be stored, vases could be replaced. But deep inside, I felt stripped bare, as though my memories were being carried away piece by piece under the disguise of modernizing. My sister Margaret visited one afternoon. She had always been my anchor, older by 3 years, practical but tender. When she stepped inside, she stopped in the entryway and looked around. "Evelyn," she whispered, her eyes scanning the walls, "your house looks different." I forced a smile. Valerie thought it could use some updates. Margaret's gaze lingered on the empty mantel, the unfamiliar painting in the hall. She didn't argue, but her silence said more than words. She touched my arm softly, her thumb brushing the inside of my wrist, a small gesture of comfort. And in her eyes, I saw my own sorrow mirrored back. That evening, I sat with my teacup at the kitchen table. I held it between my palms, letting the warmth sink into my skin. I thought of Thomas's voice, low and steady, reminding me that silence can be a form of strength. But silence was also a prison, and I wondered if I was locking myself inside. The small changes didn't stop. Valerie rearranged the furniture, giving away the armchair Thomas used to sit in by the window. She said it was too worn and ordered a sleek new chair online. She changed the dishes in the cabinet, replacing my grandmother's china with plain white plates. Each day, something vanished. Each day, I told myself it didn't matter. Yet in my chest, a hollow grew. One night, I overheard Daniel praising Valerie for making the house feel new. His voice was proud, affectionate. He didn't see what I saw, that the woman he loved wasn't simply decorating, she was erasing. I sat awake long after they went to bed, staring at the shadows on my ceiling. I tried to convince myself that maybe this was how life moved on, by shedding the old to make room for the new. But another voice whispered inside me, sharp and unrelenting, "This isn't about style, it's about control." Still, I remained quiet. Then came the afternoon that changed everything. Valerie sat across from me at the dining table, a stack of envelopes in her hand. "Mother-in-law," she began, her tone honeyed, "I've noticed you've been stressed about the bills. It's a lot to manage, isn't it? Why don't you let me handle the finances? I can make sure everything is paid on time, keep track of expenses. You deserve to relax." Her words were smooth, practiced. She smiled as though offering me kindness, but the weight of what she was asking pressed against my chest. She didn't just want to redecorate my home. She wanted the keys to my life. And as I looked at her, the last of my illusions flickered and died. I sat at the dining room table, the afternoon sun slanting across the wood. Valerie placed a neat stack of envelopes in front of me, her hands moving with practiced ease. She smiled that polished smile, the kind that never reached her eyes. "Mother-in-law," she began softly, "you shouldn't have to worry about bills anymore. You've done enough in your life. Why don't you let me handle all of this? I can manage your account, make sure everything is paid on time. You deserve peace." Her words dripped with sweetness, but I felt the weight of them pressing into me. I had spent years balancing checkbooks, making sure every penny stretched far enough. It wasn't just about money, it was about independence. Still, the thought of not carrying that burden tempted me. She slid a paper across the table. "All you need to do is sign here, Evelyn. Then you can stop worrying." My fingers trembled as I picked up the pen. I stared at the paper, lines of legal language blurring together. My mind whispered, "Read it carefully. Make sure you know what you're doing." But another voice rose, stronger and darker. "You are tired. You are alone. Don't push her away. If you lose her, you lose Daniel too." I swallowed hard. Loneliness gnawed at me more sharply than fear of losing money. The silence of this house had nearly crushed me once. I could not bear it again. So I signed. I didn't read the fine print. I didn't ask questions. My hand moved across the page as if detached from my body. At that moment, I handed Valerie the keys not only to my finances, but to my future. She smiled with satisfaction, slipping the papers back into her folder. "See? Now you don't have to worry about anything. I'll take care of everything." Her tone was gentle, almost affectionate, but it cut me deeper than any blade. I wanted to tell her that taking care of things had been my purpose all these years, but the words lodged in my throat. That night, I sat in my room with Thomas's teacup between my hands. The warmth of the liquid seeped into my palms, but inside, I was cold. I whispered to myself, "I fear loneliness more than I fear poverty." It was the truth I didn't dare say out loud. Days passed. Bills no longer came to my desk. Valerie gathered the mail each morning, tucking envelopes into her folder before I could even glance at them. When I asked about account balances, she waved her hand dismissively. "Don't worry, mother-in-law. Everything is under control. You just enjoy your time. Maybe take a walk, read a book. You've earned it." The words sounded kind, but beneath them was dismissal, as though my life, my competence, my worth had all expired. One Thursday afternoon, I decided to buy a small gift for my granddaughter, Emma. She was turning 12, and I had always given her something special each year. A book, a bracelet, a trinket that carried meaning. I wanted her to know she was loved, even when the world grew careless. I reached for my wallet, the leather worn smooth from years of use. I opened it. Empty. The cash I usually kept inside was gone. I searched again, my fingers trembling. Nothing. The card slots were bare. My debit card, the one I always carried, had vanished. A chill ran through me. My heart pounded, a sickening realization tightening in my chest. I whispered aloud, "Where is my money?" And for the first time, I knew the danger wasn't coming. It was already here. It started with small interferences, the kind so subtle you almost convinced yourself you imagined them. Valerie answered the phone more often than I did. She said it was to help me, to save me the trouble of rushing down the hall when I heard the ring. I believed her at first, but then my friends stopped calling. As much. The invitations slowed. The voices that once filled my afternoons with chatter grew faint. One Thursday morning, I dressed carefully for my book club. It was the one outing I still looked forward to each week. I chose my navy sweater and brushed my hair twice, trying to summon the woman who once felt put together. As I reached for my purse, Valerie appeared in the doorway. "Mother-in-law, are you going out again today? The weather looks gloomy. You really should rest. Remember what the doctor said." I frowned. "What doctor?" She gave me that patient smile, the kind you offer a child. Don't you remember? He said it's best for you to limit outings. Too much strain can confuse you. My heart skipped. No doctor had said any such thing. Later that day, my friend Linda called. "Evelyn, are you feeling all right?" Her voice carried concern. "Yes, of course. Why?" "Well, Valerie told us you've been having memory lapses. She said the doctor advised you not to go out alone anymore. We were worried." I froze. My throat tightened so much I could barely form words. "Linda, that's not true. I'm fine. Perfectly fine." There was a pause on the line. "I believe you, Evelyn, but you sounded a little confused the last time we spoke. Maybe just take care of yourself, okay?" When we hung up, I sat in the kitchen staring at Thomas's ceramic teacup. My hand shook so much that the spoon clattered against the saucer as I stirred. "People think I'm weak," I whispered to myself. "They think I'm losing my mind." But inside, I knew my thoughts were sharp. The cruel truth was that my world was being rewritten by someone else, and no one could see it but me. The next week, I forced myself to attend the book club meeting anyway. I walked into Linda's living room expecting the usual warmth, but the air shifted when I entered. The women greeted me with smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. Their hugs were softer, careful, as though I might break. "Evelyn, do you need help sitting down?" one of them asked. "No," I replied quickly, almost too sharply. They glanced at one another, pity flashing in their eyes. Throughout the discussion, they asked me simple questions, slowly, as if testing whether I could keep up. I answered with clarity, but it didn't matter. The damage had already been done. Valerie's whispers had taken root. On the walk home, the cold air bit at my cheeks. I felt humiliated, stripped of dignity. My feet ached, my chest tightened, but the deeper ache was inside. The people I had trusted, my circle of friends, now saw me as fragile, confused, slipping away. That night, I sat in the dim kitchen with my teacup again. The steam rose and blurred my vision. My hand trembled so much that drops spilled onto the table. I wiped them away, but the damp mark remained, a stain I could not erase. For the first time, I considered not going back to book club at all. The thought of those pitying eyes was unbearable. And so, the following Thursday, I stayed home. Valerie passed through the room and saw me sitting by the window. "No club today?" she asked, feigning innocence. I forced a smile. "No, I wasn't feeling up to it." Her lips curved in satisfaction. "Good. Rest is better for you anyway." Her words cut deep, not because of what they meant, but because of what I was becoming under them. A woman who gave up, who let go, who allowed herself to be erased. The days bled together after that. The walls of the house felt closer, the silence heavier. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a woman shrinking into herself, surrendering inch by inch. And then came my birthday. 64 years old, a milestone, a marker of survival, another year of carrying memories that mattered. Yet on that morning, no one said a word. Daniel left for work without mention. Valerie busied herself with her phone. There were no flowers, no calls, no cards from my children far away. The day passed like any other. I made my tea, watered the plants, folded the laundry. Not a single soul acknowledged that I was still here, still breathing, still alive. I sat alone that evening, the teacup warm between my palms, and thought, it is my birthday, and I am invisible in my own home. The morning of my birthday began with silence. I told myself that perhaps they were waiting until later in the day, that maybe Daniel had planned something after work, that Valerie would surprise me with a cake or flowers. I clung to that hope the way a drowning person clings to driftwood. I moved through the house quietly, brewing my tea in Thomas's old ceramic cup. I set it on the table, steam curling up into the empty air. I waited. 9 o'clock came and went. 10 o'clock. Noon. No one said a word. Daniel left early, briefcase in hand, barely looking at me. Valerie scrolled on her phone at the kitchen counter, humming under her breath. Not once did she glance at me with recognition of the day. By afternoon, the pit in my stomach had hardened into stone. I sat by the window with my knitting, though the needles clinked without purpose. I was not knitting anything. I was counting the minutes, each one heavier than the last. At 3, I overheard Valerie on the phone, her voice lilting with excitement. "Yes, come over tonight. Bring snacks, bring wine. It will be fun." She laughed lightly. "We'll celebrate." My heart lifted for a brief, foolish second. They didn't forget after all, I thought. It's a surprise. But at 6, Valerie came into the living room where I sat waiting, still in the blue dress Thomas had once given me. She looked at me as if I were a piece of furniture blocking her way. "Mother-in-law, I need a favor," she said sweetly. "Some friends are coming over tonight. We'll be a little loud. Could you go upstairs and rest in your room?" The words fell like stones. My chest hollowed. "Valerie," I whispered, "today is my birthday." She blinked, feigning realization. "Oh, that's right. Happy birthday." She turned, already fussing with the pillows on the couch. "Now, would you mind? The girls will be here any minute." My throat closed. I could not move, but somehow I carried myself upstairs. I sat on the edge of my bed, hands folded in my lap. The sounds of laughter soon filled the house. Music played, wine glasses clinked. Valerie's high-pitched laugh rang through the walls. For a long time, I stared at the floor. Then, quietly, I stood and crept back down the stairs, stopping at the landing where shadows fell. I sat in the corner of the hall, invisible, listening. Valerie's voice floated from the kitchen, low but not low enough. "Can you imagine?" she said to her friends. "This house is worth $800,000, and soon it will be ours. Daniel is almost convinced to put her in a home. There's a cousin in Nashville who runs a place. Not too expensive, and once she's there—" Her laugh cracked like glass. "Once she's there, we'll sell this old place and buy something modern. This house is wasted on her." The women chuckled. One asked, "But what if she refuses?" Valerie's tone turned sharp. "She won't. She's practically senile. Half the time she doesn't even know what day it is." The laughter that followed climbed the walls and settled like knives in my chest. I sat frozen. The music thumped faintly through the floorboards, their joy mocking the silence inside me. My hands trembled in my lap. My eyes stung, and slowly, quietly, tears spilled down my cheeks. I thought of Thomas, how he used to bring me flowers on my birthday, how he kissed the top of my head and whispered, "Another year together, Evelyn." I thought of the children's laughter when they were small, the homemade cakes, the candles glowing in the dark, all of it gone, replaced by strangers drinking wine in my living room, celebrating my erasure. I pressed my fingers to my lips to keep from sobbing aloud. The sound of Valerie's laughter cut through me again, cruel and triumphant. In that moment, something inside me shifted. The sorrow did not vanish, but it hardened into resolve. My tears slowed. My breath steadied. I wiped my face with my sleeve and lifted my chin. Slowly, deliberately, I reached for my phone. My hand still trembled, but I scrolled to a name I hadn't dialed since the funeral. Harold Whitman, Thomas's oldest friend, his law partner for 30 years, the man who had promised to watch over me if ever I needed help. The phone felt heavy in my palm as I pressed the button. I lifted it to my ear, heart pounding as the laughter from below grew louder, echoing through the house. When Harold answered, his familiar voice calm and steady, I whispered into the darkness, "Harold, I need you." The morning after my birthday, the house looked like a battlefield of wine bottles and crumbs, but the real wreckage was inside me. I waited until Valerie left for errands before calling Harold back. My voice shook, but he didn't let me finish before saying, "Evelyn, come to my office. Today. No delays." By noon, I was sitting across from him in his downtown law firm, the same office where Thomas had once signed business papers with him decades ago. The bookshelves were still lined with law journals, the smell of leather and dust unchanged. Harold's hair had gone fully white, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. "Evelyn," he said, leaning forward, "tell me everything." I did. I told him about the signed papers, the missing jewelry, the whispers Valerie spread to my friends, the birthday humiliation. He didn't interrupt, only scribbled notes in his strong, steady handwriting. When I finished, he took off his glasses and set them down. "This isn't just unkindness," he said. This is elder financial abuse. It is fraud, exploitation, and potentially criminal. The word criminal made my skin prickle. I had spent months convincing myself Valerie's actions were merely selfishness. To hear it framed as a crime gave me both dread and relief. "What do I do?" I whispered. Harold folded his hands. "First, we document everything. Every withdrawal, every missing item, every word she said to discredit you. We'll build a case strong enough to stand in court if it comes to that. But we must be patient. You cannot confront her yet. If she knows we're on to her, she'll cover her tracks." He assigned me tasks as though I were a junior partner in his firm. "Start with your bank statements. Get me as many as you can. If you can't access them online, we'll have them subpoenaed. Keep a journal of everything she says and does. And Evelyn, record her. A smartphone can be your greatest weapon. Casually set it down during conversations. Capture her words in her own voice." I nodded, determination replacing some of the shame I had carried. For the first time in months, I felt the faintest edge of control returning. That night, I began. While Valerie scrolled on her phone, I asked casually, "Do you think we should redecorate the den too?" I left my phone on the table recording. Later, listening back, I heard her mutter into her call, "I've almost convinced Daniel to push his mother into a care home. Once she signs over more authority, this house is ours." The words chilled me, but they were also ammunition. I grew more careful. Each morning, when she handed me a cup of coffee with that condescending smile, I murmured polite thanks and pressed record. When she scolded me for wanting to buy a birthday gift for Emma, I let the tape capture every dismissive word. Meanwhile, Harold's network began to work. He hired a private investigator named Sam Torres, a wiry man with tired eyes but a relentless drive. Sam checked pawn shops across the city, following the trail of missing heirlooms, 3. Weeks later, Harold called me into his office again. Sam was there, a folder in his hands. He placed photographs on the desk. My breath caught. There, in grainy snapshots, were my emerald earrings, my mother's pearls, the gold bracelets from each child's birth, each piece tagged and displayed behind glass in a pawnshop case. "They weren't donated," Sam said quietly. "They were pawned for $35,000. Valerie Ramirez signed the ticket herself." I reached out to touch the photo, my hand trembling. The jewelry wasn't just gold and gems, it was my history, the milestones of my life. To see them reduced to inventory numbers filled me with both rage and sorrow. Harold's voice was steady, anchoring me. "This is proof, Evelyn. Tangible, undeniable proof. With this, combined with the bank records, we can pursue both civil recovery and criminal charges if necessary." I closed my eyes, the weight of it pressing down. Valerie had stolen not only money, but the very symbols of my love and family. Yet as I opened my eyes again, a strange calm filled me. At least now I knew the truth. Harold leaned forward. "Now comes the hardest part. You must act as though nothing has changed. Let her believe she still controls you. Play the role she's written for you, the docile, confused woman. The more secure she feels, the sloppier she will become. And when she slips, we will be ready." The thought of pretending made my stomach twist, but I understood. I had spent months shrinking into myself. Now I would do it deliberately, not as surrender, but as strategy. "Harold," I asked softly, "how long do I have to endure this?" "Not forever," he promised. "Only until we have enough to end it, once and for all." That night, back in my bedroom, I stared at my reflection. My eyes looked tired, but beneath the fatigue was a spark I hadn't seen in years. Valerie thought she had stripped me of dignity. She didn't know I had begun to reclaim it, one piece of evidence at a time. As I slipped my phone beneath my pillow, I whispered to myself, "Play the part, Evelyn. Play it until the curtain falls." When Harold told me to keep playing along, I realized I could not fight this war alone. Valerie had Daniel in her grip, but my other children, though distant in miles, were still mine. I picked up the phone with trembling hands and dialed numbers I hadn't pressed in too long. First, Sarah, my eldest, living in Denver with her husband and 2 children. She answered quickly, her voice brisk as always. "Mom, you almost never call. Is everything all right?" I hesitated. I'd like you to come home for a visit, just for a few days. We haven't been together in so long. Silence stretched. Then Sarah sighed. Mom, what's going on? You sound strange. I can't explain everything on the phone. Please, Sarah, trust me. Come home. Her voice sharpened. If this is about Daniel's wife, Valerie, I already told you I don't like the way she treats you. But you never listen. You keep everything quiet, pretend everything is fine. Why should I fly out now? Her words cut deep because they were true. For years, I had hidden my pain to keep the family together. Because, I whispered, this time silence isn't enough. I need you here. Not to fight for me, but to witness what's coming. She didn't answer right away. Finally, she said softer, All right, Mom. I'll come Friday. Next was Michael, my middle son in Dallas. He picked up with his usual warmth. Hey, Mom. How are you? How's the weather up there? I forced a smile into my voice. The weather is fine, but I need to ask you something important. Can you come home for a few days? He paused. Of course, if you need me. But what's wrong? You sound tired. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I am tired, Michael, and I need you to see for yourself why. He sighed, heavy with worry. I hate that I live so far away. I should have checked in more. I'll book a flight tonight. When I hung up, I sat with the phone in my lap, Thomas's teacup beside me. The plan was forming like storm clouds, not noise, not confrontation, but witness. I didn't need my children to shout or argue. I only needed them to stand beside me, to see the truth with their own eyes. 2 days later, the house filled with the sound of suitcases rolling and voices echoing down the hall. Sarah hugged me first, pulling back to study my face. Her brow furrowed. You've lost weight. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I was afraid, I admitted. Her eyes flashed with anger. Afraid of what? Of Valerie? Of Daniel? Mom, you've been too quiet for too long. She's walking all over you. Michael's embrace was gentler. He kissed my forehead like he used to when he was a boy. Don't be too hard on her, Sarah. Mom's been through enough. We're here now. That's what matters. Their reactions mirrored my own divided heart. Sarah furious at my silence, Michael compassionate but unsure what to do. That night, I gathered them in the kitchen while Valerie was upstairs. The kettle hissed, and I poured tea into Thomas's cup before speaking. I don't need you to fight her for me, I said. I only need you to witness what she's done, to see it with your own eyes, so I'm not gaslit into believing I imagined it. Sarah crossed her arms. And what about Daniel? Do you plan to expose his wife in front of him? He'll defend her. He always does. The question pierced me. Daniel was my baby, the most tender of my children, and yet the one who had let Valerie chain me with silence. Would exposing Valerie mean breaking him as well? Michael voiced the conflict I had wrestled with in the dark. Mom, you have to think about what's more important. Protecting Daniel from humiliation, or protecting yourself from destruction. Which matters more? I stared into the steam rising from my cup. The answer was bitter, but clear. For years, I put my children before myself. I stayed quiet to spare Daniel shame, but this time I cannot protect him at the cost of my own life. He will have to face the truth. Sarah's eyes softened, though her voice remained firm. Then we'll stand with you, no matter what happens. Relief filled me like a tide. For the first time, I didn't feel like a solitary, invisible old woman. I felt like a mother with her children beside her. The next morning, another ally arrived, Margaret, my older sister, who had always been the mirror reflecting back my worth when I doubted it. She swept into the house with her usual calm authority, a leather briefcase in hand. She kissed my cheek, then set the case on the table and pulled out a small, heavy object, a notary seal. I came prepared, she said simply. If Valerie tries to deny anything, we'll have every document signed and stamped. She won't wriggle free this time. Her presence steadied me in a way nothing else could. Margaret had always been my anchor, the one person who reminded me that dignity doesn't diminish with age. It deepens. I looked at Sarah, at Michael, at Margaret with her seal, and for the first time in months, I felt the strength of an army gathering quietly around me. That evening, the house felt different. The lights glowed softer, the air heavy with anticipation. I had asked Harold to come, and he arrived right at 7, briefcase in hand. Margaret was already there, her notary seal tucked safely in her bag. Sarah and Michael sat stiffly on the couch, exchanging glances that said more than words. I brewed tea because it was the only way I knew to steady my hands. The steam rose from Thomas's old cup, the familiar weight grounding me. Tonight would decide everything. At 7:30, I heard Daniel's car in the driveway. My heart raced. Valerie would be with him. I pressed my palms against the table, whispering silently, "Stay calm, Evelyn. This is your home. This is your truth." The door opened and Daniel stepped inside, loosening his tie. He froze when he saw everyone gathered. "What's going on?" he asked, confusion clouding his face. Valerie followed, her smile fixed and brittle. "Daniel," I said gently, "sit down. We need to talk." He looked from Sarah to Michael to Harold, unease flickering in his eyes. "Why are you all here?" Before I could answer, Valerie cut in. "This is ridiculous. Mother-in-law, if this is about money again, you know we've been managing things responsibly." Her voice carried its usual condescension, but my children stiffened. Michael leaned forward, jaw tight. Sarah crossed her arms. I didn't reply. Instead, I reached for my phone on the coffee table. My hand shook, but I tapped play. From the small speaker, Valerie's voice filled the silence. "I've almost convinced Daniel to put her in a home. There's a cousin in Nashville who runs a place. Not too expensive. Once she's there, we'll sell this house and keep the rest." The words hung in the air like smoke. Daniel went pale. His eyes darted to Valerie. What is this?" Valerie laughed, a brittle sound. "She's twisting my words. That's not me. That could be anyone." I didn't argue. Instead, I picked up the next piece of evidence. A photograph Sam Torres had given Harold, printed clearly. I placed it on the table in front of Daniel. It showed my emerald earrings and pearl necklace under glass, tagged with a pawn ticket. Valerie's name was signed at the bottom. Daniel's breath caught. "Valerie, what is this?" Her smile faltered. That's not what it looks like. I was going to get them back. It was just temporary." Again, I didn't speak. I set down the next item, a stack of highlighted bank statements, each showing withdrawal after withdrawal. Purchases I had never made. Harold finally spoke, his voice calm and deliberate. "Mr. Moore, these are bank records in your mother's account. Nearly $90,000 drained over the last year, all traced to transactions authorized by your wife." Daniel's hands trembled as he picked up the papers. His eyes darted over the numbers, then up at Valerie. "Tell me this isn't true." Valerie's face flushed crimson. "Daniel, don't you see? This is all a setup. Your family has always hated me. They're turning you against me." Sarah slammed her hand against the arm of the couch. "No, Valerie, you did this yourself. We warned Mom, but she trusted you, and you used that trust to steal everything from her." Valerie's voice rose, sharp with panic. "This is insane. Evelyn is confused. She doesn't even remember half of what happens around here. She's old. Enough." Daniel's voice cracked like a whip. It was the first time in months I'd heard real anger in him, and it wasn't directed at me. "Do not speak about my mother that way." Silence fell heavy. Valerie's mouth opened, then closed. Her mask was slipping. I still said nothing. I simply lifted Thomas's teacup and took a slow sip, letting the quiet stretch. The weight of my silence pressed harder than any accusation could. Daniel sank back onto the couch, papers still clutched in his hands. His shoulders sagged under the truth settling in. "Valerie," he whispered, voice breaking, "tell me they're lying." She shook her head frantically. "I did it for us, for our future. Don't you see? Your mother doesn't need all that money. She doesn't even use the jewelry. I was protecting us." "Protecting us?" Daniel's voice cracked. He dropped the papers onto the table. "By stealing from my mother? By planning to throw her into a care home?" her face twisted, caught between rage and desperation. "You're too blind to see. What's practical? She's clinging to the past. We deserve better." But her words landed flat. My children watched, eyes hard. Margaret quietly opened her case, the notary seal glinting as she set it beside the evidence. Harold folded his arms, his expression one of practiced patience. I placed one last item on the table, the medical certificate Harold had arranged, signed by a doctor stating that I was fully competent, with no signs of cognitive decline. I didn't say a word. Daniel looked at it, then at me. Tears welled in his eyes. Slowly, he sank into the armchair, head in his hands. His body shook as though the weight of months, maybe years, had just collapsed onto him. Valerie stood frozen in the doorway, her face pale, her posture stiff. For the first time since she entered my life, she had nothing to say. The silence in that room was louder than any argument, and for once, it was not my silence that made me invisible. It was my silence that made me powerful. The living room was silent after Daniel collapsed into the chair, his face buried in his hands. Valerie stood stiff by the doorway, pale as marble. The evidence lay scattered across the coffee table, the pawn tickets, the bank statements, the recordings, every lie, every theft exposed. Harold cleared his throat and opened his briefcase. From inside, he withdrew a folder of neatly typed documents. His voice was steady, almost ceremonial. "Mrs. Moore, as we discussed, I have drafted an agreement. If signed, it will require Valerie Ramirez to vacate this home within 15 days, to return all stolen jewelry, to reimburse the funds withdrawn, and to relinquish any future claim over your estate. It also affirms your mental competence and right to make all decisions concerning your assets." He laid the papers on the table, the sound of the folder snapping open cutting through the heavy air. Valerie's breath hitched. "You can't be serious." Harold didn't even look at her. He turned to me. "Evelyn, this agreement is entirely in your favor. No trickery, no loopholes. You hold all the leverage now." I nodded slowly, though my heart thudded against my ribs. For months, Valerie had treated me like a feeble woman incapable of thought. Tonight, the truth shifted. The power was no longer hers. Daniel lifted his head, his cheeks wet, his voice cracked. "Mom, I don't even know what to say. I let her do this. I let her poison me against you. I thought she was helping, and I was blind." I looked at him. My youngest, the child I once carried on my hip, the boy who brought me dandelions from the yard. I could not bring myself to scold him. Instead, I spoke softly. "Daniel, you don't need to defend yourself with excuses, but you must understand one thing. Tonight, you will be the one to witness me reclaiming my dignity. You will sign these papers as a witness so no one can ever say I was confused or coerced. So no one can claim that your mother lost her mind." He blinked at me through tears. "You want me to sign?" "Yes, because you know now. You heard her voice on the recording. You saw the pawn slips. You saw the bank statements. You will sign not only as my son, but as proof that no one makes decisions for me but me." The words seemed to weigh on him, but then he nodded, his shoulders sagging with remorse. "I'll sign anything you ask." Valerie's composure broke at last. She stepped forward, her voice rising with panic. "Daniel, don't. Don't you see what they're doing? They're turning you against me. We're supposed to be a team. I did this for us." Daniel stood, his face ashen. "You did this for yourself, Valerie. You stole from my mother. You lied about her mind. You tried to erase her life while she was still living it." Valerie's mouth opened, then closed, her hands trembling. Harold slid the first page across the table. "Mrs. Ramirez, this is straightforward. Sign here, and you walk away without a trial, without prison. Refuse, and we will file charges tomorrow morning." Margaret produced her notary seal, setting it beside the papers with deliberate weight. The metallic glint under the lamplight made Valerie flinch. The room seemed to hold its breath. My children watched with tense faces, Daniel unable to lift his gaze from the table. Finally, Valerie reached for the pen. Her hand shook so violently the pen scratched against the paper. She scrawled her name across the lines, page after page, her breath uneven. The sound of the pen scratching felt like the slow unweaving of every lie she had spun. When she finished, she dropped the pen with a clatter, her chest heaving. "Happy now?" she spat, though her voice cracked with something that sounded like defeat. I didn't gloat. I didn't lash out. I simply folded the papers closed and slid them toward Harold. "It's done." Valerie looked around the room as though expecting someone, anyone, to defend her. No one did. Not even Daniel. She let out a strangled sob, then turned on her heel. The sound of drawers opening and closing upstairs echoed down the hall. Suitcases thumped against the floorboards. For the next hour, we listened as she packed her life into bags. When she came down, dragging 2 heavy suitcases, her eyes were swollen, her face streaked with tears and anger. She stopped at the door, her voice shaking. "You're going to regret this, Evelyn. One day you'll wish you had me to take care of you." I stood, my teacup steady in my hands. "No, Valerie. The only thing I regret is giving you the chance to make me doubt myself. That ends tonight." She opened her mouth as if to argue, but no words came. With one final glare, she yanked the door open. The cold night air swept in as she stepped out, her suitcase wheels bumping down the front steps. I closed the door behind her. The latch clicked, soft but final. Daniel sank to his knees in front of me, tears streaming freely now. "Mom, I don't deserve your forgiveness. I let her blind me. I let her steal from you. I didn't defend you when I should have." I rested my hand on his shoulder. "What matters is that you see clearly now. Tonight you stood by while I reclaimed my voice. That is enough." Behind us, Margaret pressed her seal onto the signed pages with a firm stamp, making everything official. Harold packed the folder into his briefcase, his nod calm and reassuring. The battle was over, and for the first time in years, my house belonged to me again. The morning after Valerie left, the house felt entirely different. The silence was no longer suffocating. It was soft, breathable, almost sacred. I walked through each room, touching the furniture, the photographs, the walls, as though reclaiming them one by one. It wasn't just wood and plaster. It was memory, love, a history that was mine again. For the first time in years, I brewed tea without glancing over my shoulder. I poured the hot liquid into Thomas's cup, the steam curling upward. My hands, once shaky, were steady. I sat by the window and sipped slowly, listening to birdsong instead of Valerie's clipped commands. It felt like breathing fresh air after being underwater too long. Daniel had stayed the night. When I found him in the kitchen that morning, he looked years older. His eyes were swollen from crying, but there was a clarity in them I hadn't seen since he was a boy. He was whisking eggs, the skillet already warm. "Sit, Mom," he said softly. "Breakfast is on me." I sat at the table, watching him move. It was clumsy, but sincere. The eggs burned at the edges. The toast was unevenly browned. Yet when he placed the plate in front of me, it was perfect. Not because of taste, but because my son had remembered how to care. As we ate, he spoke in a low voice. "I can't undo what I did, Mom, but I can spend every day from now on trying to make it right." I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "That's all I need, Daniel. Not perfection, just presence." In the weeks that followed, Daniel began to live differently. He cooked dinner with me, he drove me to the market, he asked for my opinion before making decisions. He was no longer the silent shadow beside Valerie. He was my son again. One Sunday morning, he knocked on my door shyly. "Mom, can I go with you to church?" The question brought tears to my eyes. We walked together to the pew we had once shared with Thomas. During the hymns, Daniel's voice cracked, and I held his hand the way I used to when he was a child. But it wasn't just Daniel I reclaimed. Slowly, I returned to my own life. The hardest step was facing my friends from the book club. For months, I had avoided them, too ashamed to explain why. Valerie's lies about my mind had seeped into their eyes, leaving pity where friendship once was. Yet one Thursday evening, I decided it was time. I dressed, carefully, smoothing my blouse, fastening the pearl necklace that Valerie had once pawned but was now back around my neck. My heart pounded as I walked to Linda's front porch, clutching Thomas's teacup in my bag like a talisman. When Linda opened the door, her eyes widened. "Evelyn," she whispered, and then she pulled me into her arms. "We thought we'd lost you." The living room was full of familiar faces, and as I stepped inside, the others rose to greet me. Some hugged me. Some simply touched my hand, but each gesture carried warmth. I told them the truth that evening, about Valerie, about the theft, about the humiliation, about the silence I had carried. There were tears, gasps, and at times even anger on my behalf, but when I finished, there was only quiet. Then Linda reached for the center of the table where the teapot and cups waited. She poured carefully, then slid my old seat back into place. "This is yours," she said. I took Thomas's cup from my bag and set it on the table. My hands didn't tremble this time. For the first time in years, the tea was steady in my grasp, and when I lifted it to my lips, the room filled with applause. Not loud, but warm and knowing. I was back. That night, as I walked home under the cool stars, I realized something profound. Valerie had stolen my money, my jewels, my peace of mind, but she had not stolen me, and now I was returning piece by piece to myself. Still, the aftershocks remained. At times, I'd wake in the night with a start, expecting to hear her footsteps in the hall. At other times, I'd hear Daniel's voice cracking with guilt as he apologized again and again. Healing was not instant. It was a slow stitching together of torn fabric. But each day, I felt stronger. Each day, the air in my home felt cleaner. Each day, Daniel's presence grew steadier. It was almost enough to make me believe the chapter was closed. Until the envelope arrived. It came one gray afternoon, slipped into the mail slot with the usual bills. I noticed Harold's return address in the corner. My chest tightened. I set down my grocery bag, wiped my hands on a towel, and slit the envelope open with a knife. Inside was a single letter, typed neatly. At the top, Harold's note. "Evelyn, this arrived at my office for you. I thought it best to forward it rather than surprise you in person. Call me once you've read it." Beneath his note was the letter itself. It was from Valerie. The letter from Valerie sat heavy in my lap. I hesitated before opening it, as though the paper itself might cut me deeper than any words inside. Finally, I unfolded it. The handwriting was shaky, unfamiliar compared to the confident strokes she once used when signing receipts and bills. She wrote that she was sorry, that her life had unraveled after leaving my house, that she had lost not just Daniel, but every comfort she once took for granted. She admitted to pawning my jewelry, manipulating me, and spreading lies. But then she offered something more tangible. She had recently inherited her grandmother's apartment, and she wanted to transfer it to me as full repayment of the debt she owed. I read the letter twice, 3 times. My stomach churned with unease. I expected anger, maybe defiance. Instead, here was a broken woman offering her last asset. The next morning, I met Harold at his office. He held the same letter in his hands, his brow furrowed. "It's legitimate," he said. "The apartment is in her name, free of liens. She wants to use it to settle the $89,000. It's enough to close the matter." I stared at the polished wood of his desk. "Why now?" Harold sighed. "Because she knows the weight of consequences, and perhaps because she has nothing left but shame." We arranged a meeting. A week later, I sat across from Valerie in Harold's conference room. She looked gaunt, her once perfectly groomed hair limp, her clothes ill-fitting. There was no trace of the woman who used to glide through my kitchen with smug authority. She avoided my eyes at first, staring down at her folded hands. "Thank you for coming," she whispered. I nodded but said nothing. Her attorney, a young woman with a firm voice, slid a folder across the table. "My client wishes to transfer ownership of her inherited apartment to Mrs. Moore as full settlement. The documents are here." Harold examined them carefully, then looked at me. "It's all correct. If you sign, the property becomes yours within the week." I didn't reach for the pen. Not yet. Instead, I looked at Valerie. "If you want this to end, I need something else. I need you to write in your own words every single thing you did. The jewelry, the lies about my mind, The bank withdrawals, everything. Signed and dated, a confession. Valerie's face was drained of color. Why? Isn't taking the apartment enough? No, I said calmly, because money and property can change hands, but the truth has to stay. I don't want to destroy you. I don't want to drag you into court or ruin whatever life you have left, but I will not live another day with people doubting my clarity or my dignity. That confession protects me. For a long moment, she stared at me. Then she nodded slowly. All right, I'll write it. They brought her a sheet of paper. The sound of her pen scratching against the page filled the room. She wrote line after line, her shoulders slumped, her hand trembling. I watched silently, not with satisfaction, but with a strange, quiet ache. This was not a triumph. This was closure. When she finished, she slid the paper across the table, her eyes finally lifted to mine. I know you'll never forgive me, but maybe someday you'll see that I tried to make it right. I held her gaze. Valerie, I don't need to forgive or condemn you. I only need to protect myself. That's all this is. She swallowed hard, then looked away. Harold notarized the transfer papers. Within the hour, the apartment was legally mine. Valerie signed everything without resistance. And then, as suddenly as she had reappeared, she left again, head bowed, steps heavy. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel victory. I felt light. That night, Daniel asked if he could see the apartment with me. The next morning, we drove across town to the modest building. The place was small, worn, in need of paint and repairs. But the bones were solid. Sunlight streamed through the windows, catching dust in golden rays. Daniel walked from room to room, his hands brushing the walls. It's not much, he said, but it could be something. A fresh start. I watched him, my heart swelling. It's yours to make of it, Daniel. Not a gift, not a reward, a responsibility. Build something honest here, something real. His eyes filled with tears, but he smiled. I will, Mom. I promise. As he knelt to measure the windows for new curtains, I felt the faintest stir of peace. The past could not be erased, but perhaps something new could be built upon its ruins. 1 year later, I woke to the soft light of dawn spilling through my curtains. The calendar told me it was my 64th birthday, but for once, age did not feel like a weight. It felt like a badge of survival. The house was full of laughter again. The aroma of cinnamon rolls wafted from the kitchen. Daniel was clattering around with his siblings, and I heard the sound of balloons being tied to chairs. When I walked into the dining room, I stopped short. The table was covered with flowers, cards, and a homemade cake that leaned slightly to one side. Around it stood my family, Sarah from Denver, Michael from Dallas, and Daniel at the center, his smile nervous but proud. "Happy birthday, Mom!" they chorused as I stepped forward. Tears prickled my eyes. I had spent birthdays alone, silenced, forgotten. But this day, the room pulsed with warmth. I leaned over the cake, 42 candles flickering, and when I blew them out, my wish wasn't whispered. It was live. I wished for nothing more than this: family, respect, dignity restored. After the cake, Daniel cleared his throat. "Mom, there's someone I'd like you to meet." He gestured toward the doorway, and a woman stepped in. She was not glamorous or polished like Valerie had once been. Instead, she wore a simple dress, her hair pulled back loosely, her smile shy but genuine. "This is Anna," Daniel said softly. "She teaches 4th grade. We met at a community project." Anna extended her hand. "Mrs. Moore, I've heard so much about you." I looked into her warm brown eyes and felt an immediate sense of ease. She wasn't here for what she could take. She was here for who she could share herself with. I smiled and took her hand. "Welcome, Anna. Any woman who teaches children has already chosen what matters most." Daniel flushed, his eyes bright with relief. "I've learned, Mom. I know now what's important." I squeezed his hand. "Yes, son, you finally do." That evening, after the house had quieted and the guests had gone, I carried Thomas's old teacup to the back porch. The roses he planted decades ago were in bloom, their petals soft and fragrant. I cut one crimson flower, placed it gently in a vase, and set it beside the cup. The ritual was small, but it anchored me. Later, I walked upstairs to my bedroom and opened the safe. Inside, the jewelry lay in its velvet boxes, pearls, emeralds, gold. They sparkled under the dim light, but I didn't reach for them. Instead, I rested my hand on the door and whispered to myself, I don't open this safe to count jewels. I open it to remind myself that the decisions of this life are mine. They always will be. That thought was my real treasure. I poured myself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the faint laughter of Daniel and Anna talking in the living room. Peace had returned, not in a blaze of victory, but in quiet, steady light. I had not taken Valerie to court. I had not demanded prison or public shame. Some people might think I was too lenient. Some might say justice demanded harsher punishment. But I chose another path: protection without vengeance, boundaries without bitterness. And so, dear listener, I leave you with this question. Do you think I was wrong to let Valerie walk away with only a confession and the transfer of an apartment? Should I have demanded more, forced her into the full measure of the law? Or was it enough to take back my power, my dignity, and to live the rest of my days free of hate? If you have ever walked through something similar, if you've been silenced, overlooked, or made to feel invisible, I want to hear from you. Tell me your story in the comments. Share where you are listening from, because sometimes the quietest voices carry the strongest truths. As for me, I will keep lighting a candle each morning, keep pouring tea into Thomas's cup, and keep tending the roses he planted. Life did not end when I was robbed, humiliated, and betrayed. Life began again when I chose not to let those wounds define me. My name is Evelyn Moore. I am 64 years old. I am a widow, a mother, and a survivor. And as I sit here tonight sipping tea, a single rose blooming beside me, I know one thing with certainty. After the hardest storm of my life, I found the sun. And this time, no one will ever take it from me again.